Okay, well, I'll give it to you, Tony, and then we'll go from there.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for getting up on this brisk morning at 9 o'clock for tuning in to our Hacktober National Cybersecurity Awareness Month kickoff event. It's crazy. I was thinking about this morning. This is our 4th year of doing National Cybersecurity Awareness Month events, and it's always been a lot of fun to be able to spread awareness this way. So I know we've got a full slate. Amber's worked really hard to get great speakers like today and Perry and the remaining webinars for the rest of the month. We couldn't do this without amazing sponsors to help kind of put this stuff together. So I would love to give an opportunity for Alan Berry with Centene to give a few words and just appreciation. And thank you so much, Alan.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, CyberUp is a mission that we really understand and believe in and get behind. And I spent most of my adult life wearing a uniform similar to JD's there. Got out about 6 years ago after 26 years in the Air Force. And an apprenticeship model is something that we adopted in the military ages and ages and ages ago. And everybody comes in, we call them 3 levels in the Air Force. But you show up and you're a 3 level, a newly minted airman, but you know virtually nothing, and you need an apprenticeship program to learn, to train, to be mentored by somebody that's already been there. And so it's a model that just really sings to my personal heart, and one that we're adopting at Centene as well. And so we're really excited to be part of this and happy to be a sponsor and happy to help out the St. Louis community area as well, because our company, we exist in a different space. Everybody in St. Louis knows who we are, but the rest of the country, very few people know who Centene is. We're the largest healthcare company you never heard of. So it's a strange space to work in government healthcare, and it means trying to find the talent that we can use, that we can bring on and train and teach how to protect a company. And so this is a really exciting opportunity for us, and we thank you for your opportunity or your offer to let us help.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead and share my PowerPoint for you guys. Promise it'll be quick. All right. So while you're here, obviously National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, NCCM. We're just going to briefly go over what is CyberUp's mission, just in case you're not familiar. What is NCCM? The upcoming October events, and then who you're really here to listen to is Mr. Perry. So CyberUp's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to cultivate the cybersecurity talent pipeline. We do that through our apprenticeship program for adults and then our Power Up Cyber Games for youth. So National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, or NCCM, is observed every October. It was created as a collaborative effort between government and industry to ensure every American has the resources they need to stay safer and more secure online. We're excited to host a full month of cybersecurity awareness activities geared towards youth, adults, teachers, and of course, presented by Centene. We couldn't do this without our presenting sponsor. Just want to briefly go over, we have a full month of activities planned. You can find this on our website, wecyberup.org/Hacktober. So just kind of briefly, obviously you're here with us today. On Wednesday, October 7th, the theme is If You Connect It, Protect It, with guest speaker FBI Secret Agent Kyle Storm. Then October 14th at 10 a.m., also Wednesday, it's Securing Devices at Home and at Work, with guest speaker from the U.S. Air Force 42nd Cyber Operations Squadron. October 16th, if you're a technical person, we have our upcoming Capture the Flag competition. And then October 21st, 10 a.m. is Securing Internet Connected Devices in Healthcare with guest speaker Brian Kant. And October 24th is our CyberUp video game fundraiser. So if you want a good excuse to play video games all day for a good cause, please join us. And then we're going to conclude the month of October 28th, the Future of Connected Devices with guest speaker Gary Chan. and we have Zahid Awar, and then with CyberUp. So this is why you're here today, to listen to Mr. Perry Yee. As the Director of Information Technologies for the St. Louis Cardinals, Perry Yee oversees the planning, support, and development of the team's various information technology systems. The scope of Perry's responsibilities includes oversight of the team's technology needs at Busch Stadium, as well as their new development within Ballpark Village, the team's spring training complex in Jupiter, Florida, and the Dominican Republic Baseball Academy, that the team's minor league facility in Springfield. But prior to joining the St. Louis Cardinals, Perry worked as a technology consultant for NuPont. Perry's career has afforded him the opportunity to work internationally in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Singapore, Melbourne, and London. So please welcome Mr. Perry Yee. Let me go ahead and stop sharing this.
Thank you, Amber. Actually, I want to say thank you to Amber and Tony for inviting me to speak at your event. As Amber said, it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and with the theme, do your part, be cyber smart. So I wanted to give a presentation, tell you a little bit about myself. First off, I was born and raised in St. Louis. Went to school in the city. If anyone's interested or curious, I went to St. Louis University High School for high school, which seems to be the standard question around here. And then I tell folks that I accidentally went to Washington University. And the reason why I say that I accidentally went to WashU was because WashU was actually my third choice of college. My first choice was University of Missouri at Rolla, now known as Missouri University of Science and Technology. Unfortunately, something happened with my financial aid records, and I ended up with no financial aid to attend college over there. My second choice was actually General Motors Institute of Technology. GM actually had their own engineering school where it was a 5-year plan, and you spent your summers working in one of the GM plants. And as people know, coming straight out of college, that first year of experience is worth its weight in gold. And with General Motors Institute, you would have your first year of experience. Unfortunately, that was during the time period when they were transitioning from the plant that was in North City out to Wentzville, and they didn't have a spot for me in their new location out in Wentzville. And so that leads me to my third choice, Washington University, which was one of these, pie in the sky type schools. Didn't think I could afford it. Didn't think I was good enough to enter. But when I received the acceptance letter and saw the financial aid package, I realized, hey, I can actually make this work and actually be able to go to WashU. And so I did. And at WashU, I decided to go into the engineering field. And the reason why I decided to go into engineering was because of all things, a TV show, Star Trek. It was one where, if you watch Star Trek, there's a character in Star Trek called Scotty, who's the engineer of the Starship Enterprise. And in it, something would invariably go wrong with the Enterprise, and Scotty would be called upon to find the issues, fix it, to get them back to an operational state. And that was one of those things that it just sort of spoke to me, that I wanted to be the person to be able to fix things and things like that. And so I went into being an electrical engineer studied electrical engineering over at WashU. And the reason why I picked electrical engineering was because of the variety of fields that you can go into, where you can go into the fields of power, circuit designs, computer hardware designs. I wanted to specialize in microwave and radar design, which was a class that was offered senior year at WashU at the time, because I wanted to work for McDonnell Douglas / Boeing, which was one of the larger employers back in the 80s and 90s. And it was one of these things where I essentially pre-planned my entire curriculum just to be able to take this one class senior year. And of course, as things turn out, I didn't work for Boeing, but immediately got a job with another local St. Louis company called Bridge Information Systems. And at what Bridge did, it was a stock market information provider, where they actually worked on aggregating the data feeds from all the different stock exchanges and then sending that data feed out to financial institutions, brokerage houses, things like that. And so all the things that I learned about microwave and radar design, I did not use in my work experience over at Bridge. It was a situation where after I graduated, it was one where information technology didn't quite exist as what you see today. Back then, it was still in its infancy stages. It's probably the best description of it. Where at Bridge, I started working on serial data, modems, dumb terminals, things like that. Things that you really don't hear that much about anymore. From that, it progressed to the introduction of PCs into the workplace. We were right at the cusp of seeing PCs being more an item that you'd find in an office rather than in a laboratory somewhere. And then it was, at the time in the 90s, it was a situation where we're still dealing with different like network topologies and things like that, where you had companies that use originally like ArcNet, for example, then they would progress to Ethernet, but Ethernet in the form of being ThinNet. Twisted pair didn't come until later. Wi-Fi didn't exist. Then you had companies that would go the IBM route and do token ring, things that you really don't see nowadays, or not much of it. And then it was also a situation where even the different network protocols didn't quite exist in its state, where you had people doing IPX, or they were doing like NetBIOS or NetBEUI, and then finally, eventually, people started focusing more on TCP/IP. And then you had other companies like Banyan Vines, Novell Netware, things like that that you really don't hear that much about anymore. It was a situation where I was lucky enough to be at the beginning stages of what would be considered like information technology, where I learned about networks, servers, and that progressed to applications and things like that. And one of the sort of knack that I started developing was to be able to like troubleshoot, identify problems and issues and things like that. Where, as Amber had previously mentioned, I had worked internationally, where it came from a sort of casual conversation in the cafeteria where I'd come into work just like normal. The head of sales for the U.S. Was there, came up to me, started asking the questions like, how I was doing, how was my weekend, standard questions. And then came the next question, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, no, nothing much. And then he goes, do you have a passport? And then I said, yes, why? And that's when he started explaining that there was an issue in Singapore and they were losing data packets on their stock market quotes. And when you lose data packets on stock market quotes, that's a really bad thing because traders can trade on a bad quote and lose money. And so they told me that they wanted me out in Singapore immediately to take a look at this issue. The network department was looking at it for about a month. They couldn't fix it. Still was, couldn't understand what was happening. So I was actually existed outside of the network department, but I was good at troubleshooting, and they recognized that sort of talent, if you want to call it that. And so I was sent out to Singapore by the end of the weekend. And it was a situation where all the flights going westbound through California, the West Coast, and things like that were booked. So they had to send me the long way around. And so I had to fly through Europe in order to get to Singapore. And so I spent the next 36 hours either on an airplane or in an airport just to get me there by the weekend. And so, long story short, I went out there because of the time difference. It worked out that I could work during their day to see how the data packets were being dropped in St. Louis, and then at nighttime was when I wouldn't bother anyone in Singapore. And so after a few days, I figured out exactly what was wrong. And the annoying part was the issue was actually back in St. Louis, about 30 feet away from where I sat from the computer room, instead of being all the way in Singapore. But because of that, I was able to find issues, take a look at the big picture, and narrow down to the point of what was happening and what was causing the issues. They liked that, and they kept asking me to come back to the Far East, where I'd spend a few months in the Far East, be back in St. Louis, then go back to the Far East again. And I also started going to all the different major financial centers in the U.S., where I would concentrate on the financial centers in the U.S., doing almost like an even odd year scenario, where one mostly in the U.S. and then overseas and then back to the U.S. again. And I did that for about 10 years or so. And it's kind of fun when you're in your 20s and your 30s and you have no responsibilities and you can travel and things like that. But when you're gone, my last trip, I was gone for like 6 straight months. Living out of a suitcase for 6 straight months, and that starts to wear. And when I came back, I decided I needed a desk job, and so I started focusing on business side of things rather than on the technology side of things. And that's how I ended up in charge of procurement over at Bridge, who had now at the time became Reuters, and then later became Thomson Reuters. And so it's funny because I tell people that I started at a company when it was 150 employees, and by the time I left there after 20 years, it was at 70,000 employees. So I've seen what a company can be like and watch it grow and see how things can scale up and how things can't scale up. And I think that actually helped me in my career goal to go to the Cardinals. So people usually ask the question of, how did you get your job at the Cardinals? Because people are always curious about that. And they're actually kind of surprised when I tell them, well, it was actually advertised on Indeed.com. It was listed out there where, Cardinals wants a director of information technology, and they listed all these different areas where they wanted some knowledge. And luckily, because I was more of a generalist than a specialist, I actually had the background knowledge for the position. And it also helped that I also had the formal education to go with it, where I have 2 bachelor's degrees in the technical fields, where one's in EE, the other's in computer. Later, I started focusing more on the business side. So I have a master's in business and organizational security from Webster. Currently, I've finished all my coursework on my doctoral degree, and I keep going back onto my trying to write my dissertation. And so I'm all but dissertation right now on my doctoral degree. but it's one where I had that balance of technical and business on the formal degree side and also the work experience. And it also helped that during my interview process at the Cardinals, I had found out that one of the things that they wanted to do was implement public-facing Wi-Fi at the stadium. And so during my interview process, I actually gave them a presentation on how I would do public Wi-Fi at Busch Stadium. And a few years later, when MLB came in and decided to actually start pushing public-facing Wi-Fi to all the baseball stadiums, I compared my proposal to the plans that MLB had created, and they pretty well matched up within literally 50 antennas on what my proposal looked like and what theirs was. And being able to have that information technology background and be able to figure out and scale things. I mean, when you consider that cybersecurity, when it first started, the cybersecurity back in the 90s consisted of mainly making sure that you had a password on your computer and that the password wasn't password. I mean, that was the level of cybersecurity for a lot of companies back in the early days. And when you consider that, officially I would consider myself starting in information technology in the pre-internet days, before people actually start seeing the internet at their homes and things like that. And my kids think I'm actually ancient because of that I was doing things before the internet, as they put it. But it was having the knowledge, the background, the apprenticeship and things like that I had at work and things like that helped me in my goal to working at the Cardinals. And so one of the things that people, when I tell them that when people meet me and for the first time and they ask me where you work and things like that, I usually reply to them that, well, I work in IT for a small to medium-sized manufacturing business that's based in downtown St. Louis, which is actually true. The office isn't all that big. We have about 250 people in downtown St. Louis at Busch Stadium. It's about 450 employees total if you include all the satellite facilities. We're in the manufacturing business where we actually manufacture baseball players. And it was hard for some people to fathom because you don't think of sports or sports environment as being a business. And in fact, I was at a party at one point in time, and when I told them what I did and who I worked for, the first thing out of her mouth was, "Is there technology in sports?" Then I had to explain that, well, it was one of these things where because of her comment, it started the basis for a presentation for example, for this one that I've used several places, where people have the traditional view of technology in sports, where you see things that are visible, the broadcasts, the scoreboards, the point of sales and things like that. That is the sort of more visible elements of technology in sports. But within those elements, for example, on broadcasts, so I'm having to deal with, in the scoreboard, the infrastructure on trying to support audio, visual. Nowadays, it's in addition to supporting TV and radio, have to make sure that we can support streaming of the video feed of the games and things like that on the feeds. What elements of technology that people don't think about are things such as like tickets and ticket scanning and things like that, and how it's all heading toward the digital formats. Things such as the websites, the support of the front office, which is actually the business side of the Cardinals, where people don't realize the scope of the network infrastructure that has to be put in place in order to make these things function. For example, at Busch Stadium, we have over 11,000 network drops spread throughout the stadium. And it's one of these situations where the stadium itself is about occupying a space of about 1.2 million square feet. And so you're never quite sure where you're going to have the portable concession stands. You're never quite sure where you're going to have some of the other elements. And so you have to be prepared for that. And because of that, we have to have a huge network infrastructure that's in the back that no one seems to notice or see or things like that. To the casual fan, they just want to enjoy themselves at the game. It's one of these things where if you think about sports as a business and you look at, say, the Cardinals organization, it's the equivalent to, as I said before, a small to medium-sized business due to the employee population. It's a multi-location office where Busch Stadium is the main office, and you have satellite offices where the minor league facility in Springfield is an office. The spring training facility down in Jupiter is another office. And then we have our international office, which is the Baseball Academy down in Dominican Republic. So if you think about it in terms of that, it's more of a multi-location business. And then since it's a business, it's also has the what I call the two halves of my job. The first half is supporting the office side of things, where you have like the normal duties that you would have in supporting a small to medium-sized business, where you have dealings with email, storage, the network infrastructure, cybersecurity is especially important for us, where on the cybersecurity side, it's one where we take that as one of the primary, what's the term for it? Requirements for our business. I mean, if you think about how there's the business side, and then there's like the game side, it's a situation where on the game side, think of it of your office or your business all of a sudden having 30,000 people showing up at your workplace 81 times a year. So that's for me, that's like the segue from the office side over to like the game support side. And some of the things that people don't realize is the scale at which things happen around here when it switches from being office mode to game mode. Where, for example, if we have a sellout game at Busch Stadium has enough people in the stadium itself to be the equivalent to the 15th largest town in the state of Missouri. We start having a population bigger than Jefferson City when we have a sellout game at Busch Stadium. And the scale in which you start looking at things is one where you start having to look at Busch Stadium as if it's a small town, where you start thinking of concession stands as being the restaurants and grocery stores. You think of other components within a small town where we have a first aid area that's the equivalent to a small emergency room. We even have our own jail on site for those occasions when it's needed. Things that you would see in a small town, and so we have the equivalents to that over at Busch Stadium. And because you're now working on the scale of a small town, cybersecurity is one of the more important aspects of things, where you start looking at things such as like credit card data at point of sale terminals and things like that, making sure that those are secure. The public-facing Wi-Fi that we have at the stadium. I mean, you start looking at the stadium, and you start realizing there's a ton of folks using the public Wi-Fi, and the last thing that you want to do is have something happen on that network. And so it's very important for us, along with MLB, to secure the Wi-Fi network to make sure that nothing bad happens out there. You start looking at such things as digital ticket scanning and things like that, where making sure that you don't have counterfeits, making sure you have checks and balances in place to make sure to see that, for example, counterfeit tickets don't come through. I mean, it's, as I said before, it's, in the work environment, we treat we know the importance of cybersecurity and how it just folds into the workplace. I mean, it's one where if you think about like all the different aspects, as I said before, we have public facing Wi-Fi here. The younger crowds treat Wi-Fi as if it's a utility, the same, no different than water and power. It's one where Wi-Fi is expectant and things like that almost. I mean, you go to any fast food restaurant, and more than likely you'll actually see public-facing Wi-Fi out there. There's like the constant connectivity that people want to be able, especially during games, to be able to text, tweet, upload photos to Instagram, things like that. In addition to like for example, the public-facing Wi-Fi that we have here, we actually also have our own cell site that's on premise, where we have a distributed antenna system, where we actually have 277 antennas spread throughout the stadium to be our own cell site for things, just to be able to accommodate so many people in such a small concentrated area. I mean, if you think about like all the people that are located within just the square footage of it, it's a ton of folks in a small area versus like a normal town where it's a lot of folks spread across miles and miles. And so you actually have like different issues with technology and trying to focus and concentrate signals to things so that you don't have crosstalk and things like that. Then around here we try to treat technology as an enabler, where it makes you want to come to the stadium, want to attend the games, to be able to, for example, be at your seat, see the instant replay on the big screen, and then later, if you want to see it again, be able to see it on your phone as you're watching it through Wi-Fi or cellular or anything, and be able to call up like the replay on demand. And it's those things that we try to do to treat technology as an enabler. But when it comes to like doing things with technology, it's one where you also have to be very careful about things. And on the cyber side of things, as I said before, we try to show the importance of doing cybersecurity. So when you're a new employee at the Cardinals, one of the things that we do during the onboarding process is you spend the first hour of your time with human resources, going over all your benefits and things like that. The second hour that you're here as an employee, you're talking to me about the different IT systems available at the Cardinals, but the majority of my presentation is actually done on cybersecurity. It's one where, because the Cardinals are a very public organization, we're also a very big target when it comes to people trying to do cybersecurity scams and things like that, phishing attempts. And it's one where you start looking at things and it's easier. It's one of these things where when it comes to cybersecurity, most people focus on the bigger picture where they'll drop in nice firewalls, they'll drop in, they'll put endpoint security software on individual devices and things like that. But the one area that I wanted to focus on is the people component, the side that where clicking on something is going to be your weakness. Where if you start looking at some of the employees, for example, a large portion of our employee base is under the age of 30. And you start realizing that some of these employees are literally straight out of school. And so this might be their first work experience. And if they haven't been told previously, I want to be the first person to tell them, don't just arbitrarily click on something because you see it. I go through my presentation to make people think about cybersecurity and the importance about cybersecurity, where I use examples and things like that, where on the onboarding process, I show them examples of how to identify phishing attempts, scams, how, what a possible malicious virus looks like and things like that. And the reason why I try to stress the importance of cybersecurity to folks is that not only can they use it at the workplace, but they can also take that same information and use it at home. And when you consider that now that people start flipping to being working remote and things like that, your networks at home are the weak points nowadays. I mean, if you think about it, your home network doesn't have the luxury of having these advanced firewalls, having some of the other safety features that you would have in a normal workplace. These are niceties that you have in a nice controlled environment in a workplace, but it doesn't quite extend all the way out to, the home environment, where you might be a little bit more relaxed on in terms of like how you do things with your computers at home versus what you're mandated to do with your computers at work. One of the things that, for example, when we did the switch to working remotely from during the pandemic, for us, it was an instant switch. So back in March, MLB declared that spring training was going to be suspended, and that was Friday, March 13th. By Tuesday, March 17th of the following week, everyone at the Cardinals organization was working remotely. And we did that instantaneous flip, luckily, because we actually had services available to us, and we were able to scale up almost instantaneously. And it was a situation where, for some folks, working remotely and things like that, if was not an issue, but there are others that were used to, working physically at the stadium. And so during the pandemic, my job actually got both harder and easier at the same time. It got harder because for the first few months, trying to, make sure that people are safe and secure and be able to connect to all their resources and things like that, in a fashion where they, trying to do it from home versus, at the office. And then it was also sort of easier when you didn't have some of the issues of, like, for example, supporting fans, supporting ticket scanning, things like that, where we had games but we didn't have some of the support issues that we'd normally have during a normal season. And so for me, life during the pandemic became both harder and easier at the same time. I mean, for example, for me, one of the benefits of being able to work from home during the pandemic was my kids were instantaneously, flipped to attending school virtually too, and so I was able to stay at home, help in my kids' virtual schooling, and also primarily to make sure that the internet was functioning just fine at home, so that they can attend all their classes. But as I said before, so when we treat cybersecurity as something very important around here, and so during the onboarding process, in addition to doing the identifying for the employees, how to spot phishing attempts, scams, things like that, the other important piece that automated lights in the office that I try to do is also stress the importance about social media and the importance about putting private information on social media, and I've got examples of that, but I'll discuss that later in my conversation with you. So I mean, so around here, for example, when it comes to phishing attempts and the scams and things like that we see, I mean, most people are used to seeing the letter from the barrister lawyer saying that you're the long lost relative. We're holding $20 million in an account somewhere in some foreign country. Those are the easy ones to spot. The harder ones that we try to stress around here are the what I call the emails from the known individuals, the people that have been compromised on their Outlook 365 account, for example, where you get an email from a person that and you start reading through the email. They're requesting you to go to Walgreens to buy $2,000 worth of Amazon gift cards, and they'll repay you back, once you read off their numbers on the back of the cards to you and things like that, and say that this message comes from your friend Chris, but the email's signed Christopher, something that you're not used to seeing. And so I teach the employees to be able to spot things such as to and from addresses, the formats for the emails, even if it's from what we would consider a known individual. I mean, those are some of the things that, when I was talking to some of the new employees, that no one's ever actually sat down and told them about, and things like that, to make it easier to lead by example and to be able to identify things for them. It's one where I drill into the employees around here. Be sure, be suspicious of messages that you're not expecting. Just because a title looks enticing, or don't arbitrarily click on something. Don't fall for that clickbait trap, because you might, inadvertently start off a virus or ransomware or something like that. Always, be suspicious of things, especially on things that you're not expecting. And so if you start taking a look at, years ago when I started taking a look, the employees that we're getting, were straight out of school. And when you start thinking about the age of the employee, these are the first groups of folks that are coming out during that have matured during the age of the iPhone. I mean, the iPhone started being introduced back in 2007. You start realizing that that's 13 years ago. And we start realizing at the age at which some people were getting iPhones, you're getting to that generation where these are folks that have been staying connected constantly for the majority of their life. And the problem that you run into is that because technology was new at the time and it was continually evolving, there are some times when no one has actually taken the time to sit down and talk to them about the usage of technology and things like that. And when you consider that today on the kickoff event, it's within the context of the youth series. It's one where, I mean, it's, you start thinking about like the employees and things like that, and they're, you know, these are folks that are, 21, 22. They're not that old. I mean, they're not that, far away from being, out of college and things like that. And when you consider like the 5-year time frame that, here it is, you're in middle school, 5 years later, you're starting in the first year in college. That's a lot of growth that kids have to experience in a relatively short time. I mean, you think of like how all of a sudden you have to mature and things like that. And as such, the reason why I'm bringing up this point is that during this time period is when there's a tendency for kids to be on social media and things like that. And the last thing you want to do is present something on social media that comes back to haunt you. I mean, if you take a look at over the last couple of years, there's some baseball players that have, here it is. Now they're, famous, very much in view of the public and things like that as a 21, 22-year-old. But people are finding tweets that they've done when they were teenagers, and those tweets that they did at the age of 16, 17, 18 are coming back to haunt them. And at the time, you start realizing that, these tweets, might seem innocuous at the time, banter with your friends and things like that. But these tweets are, depending on how it is, it's, might be considered like, cyberbullying, or you might be considered, things that are offensive to some folks and things like that. But when you're, 16 or 17 years old, you don't think about that something like that might follow you into like the workplace, for example. But it's one of those situations where, because I'm dealing with employees that aren't that much older than the 17-year-old, that's why I want to, stress to folks around here the importance of cybersecurity and be able to do such things as, don't put so much information on social media about yourself and things like that. All your private information, your tweets and stuff like that. Be mindful of like what you display. I mean, for example, because of how folks grew up, they don't think about some of those components. And so, I mean, in my examples, when I do the presentations to the employees, I talk about how Facebook is an identity thief's gold mine for some of the answers to those secondary security questions for credit cards, where you have questions such as, mother's maiden name. Well, that would be any sort of uncle on your mom's side that's a relative that's, connected to you on Facebook. What school you went to. You can find that on Facebook or LinkedIn. What street you lived on. Pet's name, that's the easy one. And it's things like that you list out, not thinking about that that's a piece of private information. And so it's one where I try to drill into folks around here on that, keeping yourself secure is very important. And it's one of these things, it's something that it's like an ongoing process. It's not something that's that you do just like, once and then you're done. It's one where it's a constantly evolving situation for folks, where it's one where if you start looking at it in terms of cybersecurity, as I said before, the elements of cybersecurity previously was one where, if you had a password on your computer and it wasn't password, all of a sudden your computer was secure. Well, nowadays that's, with all the different like tools and utilities that's available, that's, maybe a 5-second, thing to overcome. And because cybersecurity is an ever evolving situation, or it's one you have to evolve with those times. And that's why when I do my presentations to the employees, that I constantly, evolve that whenever I see a new scam or a new thing happen. It's one where I try to take that into account and adjust my presentation to keep people informed. Around here, we'll do to keep cybersecurity alive in people's minds and things like that. We're doing cybersecurity videos where we had contracted with this company, and we're doing, every employee gets a cybersecurity video on a monthly basis for them to review and things like that, just to keep people up to date and things. And it's a situation where, around here, as I said before, cybersecurity is very important for us. I mean, because it's one of these things where it's so easy to fall for something unknowingly that you have to go and make sure that, especially, for some folks that are not as experienced on being able to do things, that you would have to be able to, in an easy fashion, show them this is what happens and things like that. And so that sort of leads us to, like, the second half, the later portion of this presentation, where I want to talk about how, because this is part of the youth series, the importance of trying to convey that knowledge and things like that to, like, your kids and to other folks, where you want to, like, essentially increase awareness for things. I mean, I've taught my kids not to just click on any sort of like enticing title and things like that that's on a web page. I mean, there are so many different ways. If you go, for example, on yahoo.com, for example, if you go and take a look, trying to distinguish between news stories and the clickbait is difficult, because everything is stylized to the point where they almost look identical, and you have to go and start looking for the little icons to say ad, or the little logos and things like that, to make sure that you don't just click on something that ends up being a advertisement versus an actual news story. You have to do things such as, like, when you're doing this, especially nowadays when it's during the pandemic, depending on how you're set up from your workplace, you might be doing something where you're using your home computer versus using a work computer. And you have to make sure that, that's protected. And, that you have all the updates in place, that you have antivirus, anti-malware in place, and things like that. And some of the things that, for example, at work, I always stress to, like, especially to new employees, doing things such as, like, using, like, unique passwords. Don't use the same password for everything. Around here, we started instituting long passwords, where depending on if you have higher rights or not, your password might be as short as 15 characters, but mine's like over 21 characters. And so teaching people that, a password doesn't actually have to be something that's hard to remember. It could be a phrase in a song or something like that to make it a little easier for folks to type out. So when it comes to teaching the youth and kids and things like that, doing such things as being involved with them, seeing from the parent side, to seeing such things as their online activity. What are they actually doing and things like that? Who are their fans? Make it to the point where you talk to the kids to make sure that things are going well, that they're not experiencing things such as cyberbullying, that they're having appropriate online interactions with folks and things like that. Because if you start doing things such as just primarily relying on different software packages, on content advisors, things like that, you're taking the people element out of things. And the people element is the one thing that you should be introducing, especially in sort of cybersecurity, because it's just because it fits in and gets blocked by a particular filter doesn't mean that someone's varied it slightly, that it just passes through the filter and you don't realize that something inappropriate is coming through. And that's why I never 100% rely on just software alone. That's why I always stress the people component on things, just to make sure that the people component gets addressed. I mean, it's one of these things where when you start dealing, especially in cybersecurity, you realize that, as I said before, there's a huge variation in things where, when it comes to, protecting against viruses, scams, and things there's the cookie cutter fashion that, the different software packages that you use to different endpoints will easily pick that up. It's always those sort of the 0-day type events that flow through that creates and wreaks the biggest havoc. And for people to vary things slightly, it's very easy for them to do, so that stuff just comes through, for example. And so you have to bring in the people component to make sure that things are in constant attention. Is probably the best description of it. Let's see. Looks like we're at a little bit after 10 o'clock, and so it's one of these things where trying to think of. You have to excuse me. I normally don't do public speaking. I'm usually the person behind the scenes, trying to make things work. And so it's one of these things where thank you for bearing with me for so often. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Yeah, I actually have some questions, and for people who feel comfortable unmuting yourself to ask more, by all means, we do have that capabilities. For a minute, I thought we wouldn't, but we do. So maybe I'll just start off with a few, and then people can trickle in if they have any. So what percentage of your day would you estimate is spent on cybersecurity training versus hands-on or actually the technical stuff? I was noticing a theme of you're always having these monthly briefings.
So on a normal day, I would spend about 10 to 15% of my day on cybersecurity, where I treat cybersecurity as the fun component. It's the component that it's always new. And it's a situation where training of employees usually comes along when we that usually ends up being a monthly thing, where about once or twice a month, we'll get a batch of new employees, and that's when I'll go and do the cybersecurity training. But we also have what I call the continuous trainings, where we have like the monthly videos, where it's a short video. It's about anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes long. And then at the end of it, there's a question that people have to answer. And the videos are set up in such a manner where you don't have an obvious yes or no type answer. It's it could be A, it could be B, or it could be C type answer, where I try to make the thing I like about them is that it makes people think, and it makes people realize that, like I said, scams aren't a one size fits all type model. They come in all sorts of different sizes and things like that. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you run your own phishing kind of exercises where you try to just send it, they don't know about it, and see if they pass or fail if they actually click on it? And if they do click on it, what happens? Do they have to come back in for extra training?
yep, that's exactly what I do. Where it's gotten to the point where the employees are very suspicious of anything that I send myself. But it's one where I'll get some of the folks that report to me, or I'll recruit someone else to send like the test message. But it's one where you have a certain number of fails. That's when you have to have like your remedial course on cybersecurity to make sure that you're up to date on things.
Right.
If you look at the workplace, it's not everyone is in the same age group. I'm dealing with folks that are 21 all the way up to folks that are 71. And so there's a huge range of people at work, and there's also a huge range of technical abilities. And so you have to sort of scale things to the person and to their knowledge versus just doing like the one size fits all to say, okay, you failed, and here's your punishment. It's more like you didn't do so well, but here's how you learn more, but make it to the point where it's actually interesting and their eyes don't glaze over as you're giving them this training.
Right. Or the walk of shame. You're not like shaming them, terrifying them to even answer an email. Did you respond to my email? I don't know. So you mentioned how your kids are going remote as well. Do you find yourself being the IT support for your teacher as well, or do you try to like have that separation?
I try to keep that separation where if it's something happening to my kids' laptop or their iPads and things like that, then I'll help. But if it's the teacher who's having issues with something, you don't want to fall into that trap where once you help them, you're constantly helping them for the same exact thing, rather, give them advice to say, I think it's this, so that the next time it happens, that they check that first versus just, picking up the phone and calling the help desk and things like that. I try to instill that, if something happens, think of what you did previously and what's happening right now, and did one cause the other. And it's one of these things where I try to make sure that people learn from things versus just, doing the automatic, pick up the phone type of situation. So
Yeah, just pick up the phone. Okay.
Yeah.
How often do you find the bad actors are trying to hack either the Cardinals directly your servers, the stadium, public Wi-Fi? I know for us, sometimes we like to do the Wi-Fi pineapples at schools to show students how real it is. Don't just trust blindly to log into a public Wi-Fi. So do you always get bombarded with that stuff? Is it a constant thing for you?
It's a constant thing that we get bombarded by the scam email message viruses and things like that. And we have a very robust cybersecurity program, and it's one of the things where sometimes when I'm bored, I'll have fun with the scammers, where I'll try to scam the scammers. And it was a situation where we had one incident where someone tried to impersonate the general manager of our Memphis facility previously. And so I could tell that a fake message and things like that. But I told our accounting department, here, send this message back to them. Tell them that we can't do the wire transfer that they requested, but if you send me a name and a street address, we'll physically FedEx out a check to them. And this went back and forth for a little bit, and lo and behold, they actually send in 2 names and 2 street addresses. And so when I started looking at the names and street addresses, one led to this 70-year-old retiree on Facebook. The other was this mom of 3 who was also on social media. And then I started realizing that these are folks that got scammed at one of these work-at-home scams where, you get a message, receive letters, packages, and things like that on our behalf, and repackage them and then forward them to another location. Well, when I realized that these were probably more victims than scammers, I packaged up all the information, just sent it off to MLB to say, hey, this is happening to us. You might want to check on some of the other teams to see if they're getting the same thing too. And so, but it's one of these things where when I'm not busy, there are times when I like to scam the scammers.
Have a little fun.
Yes.
That's what we like to do on our low time, even though we're just a nonprofit. We're not as large as the Cardinals, but yeah, it happens to us too. And whenever we have time on our hands, we have a little fun. So,
And speaking of which, here's my Wi-Fi pineapple.
Nice. Do you have a little fun with that too?
A little bit. It's like I'll make my own public-facing Wi-Fi, and just to see if people connect to it or not in the office. It's very low range. I don't have the settings set up very high. It's just enough for the area around my office.
Just to see what's going on.
Yes.
It's another test. See, people aren't gonna trust anything. So, what would you say your biggest accomplishment is, either personally or even professionally?
Oh, that's going to be a tough one.
Lucky one, right?
Yeah.
I just got deep.
So, professionally, it'd probably be, working here at the Cardinals, because it's a dream job for a lot of folks. And it just sort of surprises some people when they ask me, like, how did I get my, dream job? And when I tell them it was advertised on the internet, and especially when you consider that I didn't come from the sports field, I didn't know anyone at the Cardinals, and I'm very non-athletic. I mean, that's the reason why I'm in IT versus another field. But it's one where I've lived in St. Louis all my life, the majority of my life, and working with the Cardinals is always like one of those dream jobs that you hear about, you never quite see happen. And in my case, it actually did happen. And it went the route where, just about, I was in the same boat as everybody else, but I'm the lucky one that's here.
Yeah.
Personally, probably my biggest accomplishment would probably be my kids. So making sure that they grow up to be knowledgeable and successful and things like that. So.
Nice. All right. Does anyone feel brave enough to unmute yourself and have any extra questions for Mr. Yee before we wrap this up? Or I can also, if you're not a kind of person who likes to actually speak on these things, I can actually open up a poll and you can write in your question too. So let me do that.
I'll ask a question. And as a person who attends baseball games, obviously not in 2020, right? do you have? That was not a great start to my question because that is tangent. I was trying to think how to phrase it, right? So you mentioned having public and free Wi-Fi for the stadium, right? Because I know connectivity in the stadium outside of Wi-Fi is a nightmare because there's so many people in the place and networks get bogged down. What is your take on public Wi-Fi for folks and using that stuff at places like Starbucks or at a Cardinals game? Is there a risk to that, you think, or what's always advice you would give for somebody?
So the advice that you give to people, especially when using public Wi-Fi, is see how secure they've done public Wi-Fi. For example, the biggest issue I've seen with a lot of places is that they do not turn off peer-to-peer. And if you're not familiar with what that means, is that if I'm on the public Wi-Fi and you're on the public Wi-Fi, if you do not have peer-to-peer turned off, I can see your computer can see my computer. And that's usually the first sign of something that I look for if I'm using public Wi-Fi. Is like, do I see all the other folks on the same network as me? During my presentation to the new employees, that's one of the things I stress, where I have a Wi-Fi app on my phone. And so I did things such as test the Wi-Fi that I saw in the airport. I also tested the Wi-Fi that I saw on the airplane as I wanted to watch a movie. And I could realize that in both places, the public, Wi-Fi I could see other people off of that access point. Same thing with the airplane, where here I am on the airplane and I can see the 13 other people. It's also on the network on the airplane's Wi-Fi. And so that's usually the first sign that I see that if the public Wi-Fi isn't secure, I'm not getting on it.
Smart.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't think about that. They just need Wi-Fi now, and so they click and go.
Yeah, they don't realize that people don't think about their signals and who else can see your signals. That's why a cellular connection could be a better option. Especially when you consider that a lot of data plans nowadays are essentially unlimited. I barely use my data plan on my smartphone, mainly because it's one where all the things that that you can do in and offload the Wi-Fi at home, for example, is one where it just minimizes like my usage on the cellular side.
So things like NordVPN, they've done a pretty good job of marketing, right? Of just how amazing it is to get a VPN. Is there value for somebody to add that as they're connecting to public Wi-Fi?
It helps. It's one of these things where it helps, where the things that you transmit to and from, it's going to be secure, but it's that initial getting onto the system and things like that might be your sort of like your risk. But having a VPN access is a lot better than having no VPN access on securing your connection.
And then I'm going to ask one more question. Sorry, I'm not trying to commandeer the question section. So I know we have a couple folks that are on that are in our pipeline as apprentice candidates, and they're trying to make a break into the career field, right? And some are starting with degrees, some are starting without degrees. What advice would you give somebody wanting to get into a cybersecurity career, and what would be the best kind of pathway for them to take to get there?
So, as I said before, my pathway was like long and winding and wasn't quite a straight line. But if I had to do it all over again, having the formal degree and things like that helps out a lot for certain organizations where you want to see the formal degree to make sure that you have the background and things like that, the basis for cybersecurity. I think a lot of it depends on the company, because there are other companies that want the person that's clever, the self-taught person, things like that, that thinks outside the box, where they come up with ideas that you normally wouldn't think about because that's sort of the way their brain works. But it depends a lot on the organization where you're trying to get your job, whether it's going to be more the formal approach or if it's going to be the more the startup and inventive entrepreneurial approach, where it's trying to do things in a different fashion. Hopefully that so that answers the questions where it's essentially hope would be the choice.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
What about someone who doesn't have time for such a long and winding road of getting the degree? What would you say would be the best process for an apprenticeship? Someone who's not just right out of school.
So there are, like, for example, CyberUp would be a good start to learn.
I'm there.
There are all these different cybersecurity conferences like that are available. Where the biggest one being DEF CON. Problem is that DEF CON is relatively expensive for some folks. Where the entry fee alone is like $300 cash, and that doesn't include things like the hotel in Vegas and things like that. But there's some local cybersecurity conferences where you can actually start getting a taste of what the industry is looking at and getting a taste of what people are doing. I mean, it's one of these things where one of the things that I love doing is looking at social engineering and the people side of things. And learning at some of these conferences on what people are doing on the social engineering side has always been very informative. And when you start presenting that information to people, that's when you look at cybersecurity in a different light. But attending conferences and things like that, and seeing like what else is out there and what else people are looking at and concentrating on would be a good start to where.
Okay, what did you call it? It was kind of the psychology of.
No, the cybersecurity conferences. I always like looking at the people side, the social side, social engineering.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because going to these conferences, you don't see. Every conference I've been to has always been a little bit different because of the different presenters and also the people that are attending. I like the people watch and see like the people that are attending these conferences and what they're thinking about and dealing with. And when you start talking to the guy that's literally standing right next to you and ask them their opinions about, what do you think of this? And then they start seeing how other people's minds work. So.
Okay.
But it's always hard trying to get that first step into cybersecurity. especially if you don't have time for like the formal route of getting a degree and things like that. If you can start, going in and looking at how, I mean, for example, up on YouTube, DEF CON places all their presentations and things like that up on DEF CON for DEF CON. And so you can actually go and see for free, like how all the different meetings and trainings and presentations are. And it's actually sort of eye-opening to see how people are manipulating things in order to get someone to react and to do stuff.
Hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right. If no one has any other questions, we really appreciate you joining us today, even though I realize and can appreciate wanting to be behind the scenes person. I appreciate you still speaking and joining us and answering our questions. It was great. Thank
Well,
you so much.
thank you for inviting me. So,
Yeah,
it was fun.
definitely. All right. Well, everyone else, thank you also for joining us on the Saturday morning. Enjoy your weekend.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you. See you
Bye.
guys.